Texas, one of the first states in the country to restart its economy, reopening some businesses last Friday as the Senate prepares to get back in session tomorrow morning. Joining me right now for more on all of this is Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who serves on the Judiciary and Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
Maria, good morning. Good to be with you.
You have done so much work, and I want to thank you for that. You've introduced a number of bills with regard to China, and I want to talk about those because China has created a number of lobbying groups in the United States. They've done it in Hollywood, they've done it in university, and this morning we have more breaking bombshell news in an investigation that we've certainly been doing a deep dive into China, whereas the Chinese Communist government lied about the coronavirus. Tell us what's most important in keeping China held accountable. Senator.
Well, I think the most important long-term national security and foreign policy consequence of this coronavirus pandemic is going to be a fundamental reassessment of the United States' relationship with China. I believe China is the most significant geopolitical threat to the United States for the next century, and I have been saying that for years. Many in Washington have not been interested in hearing it or have refused to listen. I think this coronavirus pandemic has opened the eyes of many in Congress, many in Washington, and even some in the media. If you look at the pandemic itself, the communist government in China bears enormous responsibility, enormous direct culpability for this pandemic. We know they covered it up. We know that when heroic whistleblower doctors tried to draw attention to it in December of last year, the Chinese government shut them up, it punished them, it silenced them. Had they behaved responsibly and sent in health professionals and quarantined those infected, there's a real possibility this could have been a regional outbreak and not a global pandemic. And the hundreds of thousands of deaths worldwide are, in a very real sense, the direct responsibility of the communist Chinese government's lies.
Yep. And now we get a 15-page research document which lays the foundation for this case of negligence, and it lays the foundation among the Five Eyes, the five countries who are together, unified, yep, which basically were the ones who were most affected by China's negligence, including the United States. So does the U.S. have allies across the world on this?
Well, yes, and the Five Eyes are our closest allies with whom we share the most sensitive intelligence information. And the Five Eyes network itself, the integrity of that network has potentially been seriously compromised because the United Kingdom had made a decision prior to this pandemic to allow Huawei, the giant telecom company that's owned and controlled by the Chinese government, to build some of the telecom infrastructure and equipment in the United Kingdom. I had spoke out loudly against it. A number of us had, because Huawei is a multi-billion-dollar espionage agency for China. And if they build the infrastructure, it gives them the ability to surveil and to intercept. And from the perspective of the Five Eyes network, we can't be sharing information with a system that is compromised. As I said a couple of months ago, four eyes are better than six eyes, which means as much as we love the Brits, if they're going to set up a system that lets the Chinese hack into the communications, we're not going to be able to share the same information. Here's the good news, Maria. Post-coronavirus, the reports out of the United Kingdom are that the Prime Minister and the government are seriously reconsidering that Huawei contract because of these security risks. It's an example of all sorts of people who were potentially attracted by the billions that China offers in enticement, and now realize the line and the danger from China.
You make such important points, Senator. You know, Secretary Pompeo joined me literally a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, and said on my program, on this show and on Mornings with Maria on Fox Business, we will not share as much information with European friends if they have Huawei Telecom, because there are backdoors in all the technology, and all the data that's going through Huawei goes directly back to the communist country. I want to get into specifics here, because you and I spoke over the weekend as we prepared for this interview, and we talked about the theft that is so prevalent coming out of China, the theft of intellectual property. You said right now, as we speak, the Chinese Communist Party has directed students, if you will, researchers, if you will, at MD Anderson, one of the leading cancer institutions in America, in the world, and they're stealing from us right now in regard to cancer research. Tell me about that.
No, that's exactly right. What we're seeing from China, look, there's always been theft, and there's been piracy and industrial espionage. What we've never seen in the history of the world is a nation state with trillions of dollars of resources like China, who uses the theft of intellectual property as a strategy, who invests billions of dollars into it. So they go into universities. MD Anderson had a number of instances of Chinese nationals on the payroll of the Chinese Communist government, making more from China than they were making from MD Anderson, who were stealing their intellectual property. And this, by the way, is not missile technology. This is treatments and cures for cancer. They're doing this at universities throughout the United States. They're doing this at businesses throughout the United States. You know, this week I've got 4 pieces of legislation I'm introducing. One of them is legislation that prohibits the U.S. government from conducting any business over any telecom or internet infrastructure that China owns or controls. Why? Because they use it to steal. That is part of their strategy.
Right.
Last fall, I traveled to Asia, did an Asia tour of Pearl Harbor, Japan, Taiwan, India, Hong Kong. Really friends and allies all surrounding China. The entire purpose of the tour was to talk about China's threat. You know, when I was meeting with the leaders of our Pacific Command out there, they were saying the military threat from China is enormous. And one of the reasons is that they steal our military technology, so they don't have the R&D costs. They just steal what we invent, and they're flooding hundreds of billions into building up their military. It is dangerous, and we've got to treat them like the threat that they are.
So this is how China does it. They create all these lobbies, right? They've created a lobbying group with universities so they could send their researchers in there to steal. They've created a lobbying group with Hollywood. They fund all the movies so that Hollywood listens to them. They've created lobbying groups throughout America. One of your bills is called the Script Act. I want you to talk about that because they've really bullied Hollywood, and Hollywood producers roll over about it. You've mentioned a couple of films before, Top Gun, Bohemian Rhapsody. Tell me what your Script Act does, real quick.
Yeah, no, it really is tragic that Hollywood has been willing over and over again to kowtow to the Chinese communists and let the Chinese government censor American movies. And so I introduced legislation called the Script Act.
We're showing the Top Gun jacket, Maverick's jacket right now on air. We're showing Maverick's jacket on air right now because the Chinese Communist government told Hollywood, take off the flag of Taiwan and Japan off of Maverick's jacket, right?
Yep. And Hollywood happily complied. And think about it for a second. We're saying Maverick is afraid of the damn Chinese communists. This is ridiculous. And China is willing to happily go along. And how about Bohemian Rhapsody?
In Bohemian Rhapsody, the Chinese Communist government wanted them to edit out a part when Freddie was gay. How do you tell the story of Bohemian Rhapsody and not say that Freddie was gay?
You don't, but Hollywood was more than happy to edit the scene out. They did it because the Chinese government didn't want to acknowledge that Freddie Mercury was homosexual. Look, that's a huge part of his story. And the problem is Hollywood is more interested in making millions of dollars from the Chinese market than they are in free speech, than they are in artistic integrity. And so what the Script Act says is, all right, fine. If you want access to the Pentagon, if you want access to jet airplanes and ships, by the way, there were 1,000 movies that used access to the military to make the movies. If you want access to the Pentagon, you can't let the Chinese censor your movies. And it blocks it. It's trying to use the assets we have to discourage them kowtowing to the Chinese communist censors.
Senator, thank you for your work on this. You're doing a great job. Please come back soon. Senator Ted Cruz, we will talk with you soon. Thank you, sir. We'll look at that legislation this upcoming week. And stay with us. We'll be right back.